let's wait a. Okay.
Oh. No, you have to get started now. We've decided.
I had to
Voted.
get started. Yeah, this was something that I was starting to discuss with Annabelle, and we just thought, hey, let's bring it over to the UX sync. Also because we ran out of time, so we thought, oh, let's make use of this time. But anyway, yeah, one of the first steps in the restructure MR's work is prioritizing the problems that we identify. So in the issue description that is linked from there are a bunch of problems that have specific research insights attached to them, and we know that there are problems and so on. But the more that I was thinking about it, it didn't make me it didn't make a lot of sense to me that, first, that we had to prioritize them as much, because if you have to start prioritizing, maybe you have too many problems to solve, and at the same time it's also about how can we elicit good solutions and ideas to solve those problems. And this, yeah, I started a prioritization sheet that I can share my screen, that I was starting to add some nice formulas here to calculate the score and the priority, blah, blah, and add the problems here. And I was thinking, like, these problems overlap a lot. And for example, developers would rather use quick actions than interact with dropdowns. This is not a major problem, right? This is, something that we need to consider, but it's not something that we will go out of our way to solve. And so with these overlaps and so on, I tried to start writing down like the 3 large problems that I was seeing, and they all seem to revolve around the information architecture. And I wrote them there, like, it's, navigation, just very little room for focused reviews in the changes tab, and in the overview tab, the just being so overwhelming, that it has so much information that even with that amount of information, it's still difficult to get an overview of the MR. And yeah, so this is, mostly me trying to think through all of this, and wondering if any of you have any thoughts or maybe, just questions that might help me think a little bit better about this. Because, just to wrap up my part, so I wrote down those 3 large problems that I see, and then I wrote after them, like, in what ways can we give users access to the information they need along their code review journey? Just trying to phrase the problems again in a way that elicits broad solutions, and that's not just focused on, hey, it's difficult to navigate comments, because it's not just about comments, right? And below each problem, I was thinking, what do we need? What information do we need to answer this question of in what ways can we? And to me, I wrote down, for example, for navigation, one of the things that we need in insights is, what are the actions and information that users need during this code review journey? Because if we don't know what they need, we cannot answer this question about in what ways can we give users. So yeah, again, just me trying to structure this a little bit and coming to the realization that maybe we don't need to prioritize them so much, because as we discussed in that presentation that we did for this work and the document, these problems are all connected to each other. but I just don't want us to have a very big list of problems. I'd prefer if we just have something focused, like, 2, 3 problems. And anyway, I'm just talking a lot. I hope what I'm saying makes sense, but it's just raw output from my head. So it doesn't make sense because everyone's silent. Everyone's confused. Yeah, Ben, you can voice your comment.
Yeah, you guys can take this or leave it, but one thing that's worked well, and I've had this in the past, is you sort of affinity cluster. So you can group, in this case, by like the problems that would be fixed by the same solution, right? So you're narrowing down your like number of targets. So if a bunch of them are IA related, you can group those, and then like, hey, if we fix the information architecture, we knock out all of these things, and that can be one way to tackle it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, yeah, to me, yeah, that would probably, yeah, I think that would be part of that. And in a way, that's what I was trying to do under point B, was taking that list of problems that we have in the issue and try to consolidate them around, as much as possible, non-overlapping problems, problems that are more or less unique, but not too broad. Like the broadest problem is the UI doesn't have focus, right? That's a very like, how can we bring focus to the UI? That's too broad. But yeah, affinity clustering would definitely be part of it. And I added, maybe doing a 5 whys exercise for the top problems, so we get to, the root causes. But I mean, I think we already know what the root causes are. So again, if some of this doesn't make sense, it's just because just me talking aloud about it.
Can I don't even know how to phrase this. Are you looking for more specific problems because you don't think we can solve the broad problems, even though that's sort of what the purpose of the restructuring is to do, is to sort of like broadly solve those problems? I guess I'm not clear on like what we're trying to accomplish by like refocusing sort of the things that we already knew were problems. And I say that because the reason we knew these were problems was that they were big problems that we couldn't solve in very focused ways. And that's why we sort of chose to go this different way to think about it. And so what are we trying to get at now?
Yeah, I think it's so let me share my screen so that we're all looking at the same thing. So there are these these problems are all connected more or less to each other, but some of them we're not going to be able to address immediately with the restructure. For example, developers need to constantly refresh the MR to get an accurate depiction of the current state of an MR. Like if the technology doesn't provide this, it doesn't matter how good of information architecture you have, right? And another example is merge requests with lots of comments, threads, and activity are difficult to follow, or comments appearing across the overview tab and changes tab can be confusing. These are, I think, yes, problems pain points, but the way that they are phrased, and they're more or less the same thing, they do not elicit broad ideation. This is one is just focused on comments appearing across your review tab and changes tab. But we also have, or will have in the very short term, the same problem with those security and code quality findings. Like, there are also things that can exist attached to changes or not attached to changes. And they can appear in multiple places at the same time. So in a way, is what I'm trying to do is clean up this list to have less things, and with the few things that we end up with, have them phrased in a way that provides clear focus to everyone. So that's more or less it. I don't know if, so we're still solving the same things. Like, of course, we're not going to, again, to solve conventional comments. We're not going to work on that, right? For example, if an MR description is descriptive enough, reviewers will then check the linked issue. Like, this is something we'll take in consideration, but we're not going to solve MR descriptions not being descriptive enough, right? So it's just consolidating this and highlighting which are, just the top problems and phrasing them in a way that promotes good ideation.
What do you think about some of those doesn't, is it more about, because of the phrasing, you think they don't solicit good ideation, or is it because you think some of those are aspirational, or maybe not within the realm of solving that you want to eliminate them? And let's just take two that you point out. One was merge requests are not updated in real time. Like, do you think that aspirationally that's like out of scope for restructuring to say the ultimate design vision requires these elements on the page to be updated in real time? And so, like, wouldn't that be something we would want to account for in thinking about how we're structuring information, because the aspects of real time versus not real time might change where you would place stuff or other things like that? Maybe just a thought. The other one that you put on there was, or that you mentioned, was comments appearing on overview and changes tab. And that is something that we've talked about sort of a lot, in the sense that, like, those are duplicative things in many cases, or they're very awkward in many cases. And they might require us to sort of like rethink entirely how we approach those two tabs. And so making sure that, like, yeah, they're very broad and big problems, but like they're also broad and big so that we can think more sort of like aspirationally about, I think, where we want to be. If they were narrowly focused, it feels like we would just solve them, I guess, is maybe my point.
Yeah, I think it's just a balance, and it's I think it's about semantics, and we don't need to get stay here in this moment for too long. It's just me trying to, because the other part of this is, that can also have some context, is, okay, we're these are the problem statements, and we, in that document and the presentation, we had some bullet points about the problems, but they were, again, not phrased in a way that has a balance between broad and narrow, and that, again, elicits the ideation. And we're also, one of the things that we're going to do is bring in other designers to provide input on directions that we could work on to address these problems and have that brainstorming with them. So it's just a way for us not to get too hung up on, you know, the specific details, because, for example, you mentioned comments, overview, and changes tab, but once you think about it, it's not only like if you try to change that, it's the comments, but then it's also about how I can navigate in the future to findings that are attached to lines of changes. It's also like, what do we do then with the pipeline and commits tab? And then the overview tab. So it's all of those things together are, you know, more or less the same problem. And that's why I was with that, and you can see in under C1, I was trying to write it in a way that tries to capture all of that, right? Because that's the problem basically that we're trying to solve. And it's separate from the second one, which the second one is much more focused on the changes tab. And we know that, you know, regardless of navigating comments and regardless of the overview tab and users being informed about the state of the MR and not being overwhelmed, we know that it's a big problem is, okay, you get to the changes, you're just looking at the code, and there's not a lot of room. There's so many things going around that it doesn't leave a lot of room for focused review. And then the other problem with the overview tab, which is separate from the other ones, it's still related to information architecture, but it's focused on how can we inform the users about the state of the merge requests without overwhelming them. And this is just looking at the primary pieces of data that users need to take a look at when they reach a merge request, and to actually give them an overview. And these I think are all related, but at the same time, they are distinct. And to me, they feel like more that they have consolidated everything that we have listed in that issue. And this was just, you know, a quick exercise to me, but I don't know if it makes sense to you. Carrie, you raised your hand. I just saw that now.
Just want to respect the process. Now,
Okay.
I'm an interloper to the UX group here, so forgive me if this is something that you are. It's like obvious and baseline, but like what I kind of hear you saying is that a lot of the feedback and the notes, and this is kind of what I'm seeing, is it's specific to like solving a specific problem that is outside the larger context of, you know, looking at a more holistic or tabula rasa solution from the task-based perspective of like, what is the user, what are all of our users trying to accomplish within how they interact with a merge request, right? Mm-hmm. So like we want to, you know, you want information about the conversation that's happening, or you need to do the task of reviewing it, et cetera, et cetera. And we kind of micro-optimize in a lot of ways, a lot of our feature set around specific features or problems that people are having in isolation from the other pieces and goals that users have when they're interacting with it. Is that kind of what you're angling at?
Yeah, it is. It is trying to view things holistically and less focused on, you know, the specifics about the features themselves. Like that's then the information that we need to address those problems. Is like, you know, a very focused problem is how can users more easily check out their code, right? But maybe with the context of the merge request as it is today, maybe the problem is actually how can users find the most important actions that they need to take in a merge request more easily, which includes checking out might be one of the most important actions, but it's not just, there are other important actions.
So I think I kind of had a similar question in our one-on-one about prioritizing these problems when we couldn't do it months ago, which is what led to this, I suppose. But I think, again, and I don't know if this is what you're thinking either, grouping, I agree, definitely some of those problems are so similar. And I tried to, in my little rearranging demo for the lo-fi mockup, I addressed like maybe 4 of them just at once because they were the easier ones. Like, I can't find the widget, so it's at the bottom. I don't want fixed elements. I removed those. I don't know what else I did. Tried to deduplicate some elements like the source branch button and that kind of stuff, and then just kind of make the hierarchy make more sense. But when you're talking about totally, like, that's just kind of rearranging and making it more logical. And then you've got other features like the comments being spread between 2 different places. I feel like is such a very complicated problem, because even though I removed 2 tabs in my little mockup, I couldn't easily think of a way to like fix that problem. And that's a problem that I feel could use more insight and input for maybe a bigger group of people, because they might have some really different ideas about how to remove a tab or combine things or linking back and forth between the comment from the 2 tabs. I don't know what to do about that one, but I think if you're talking about simply rewriting them, I think that makes sense. Although I did kind of like the list. Like when I was designing it, I was like, okay, we're addressing these problems, and I'm clearly not addressing those ones. So I could tell what was going on and which ones had the check marks. But separating out features like that, I can definitely see value in. Like, forget the design. What could we do about the comments being in 2 places, and how does it make the most sense?
Does it make sense? And you sort of did this with like your C123, like instead of trying to like rewrite, like to make a new problem statement that encompasses a bunch, like could you just group them in themes and be like content with that and say like one of the themes is navigation, and here's like a subset of like very specific problems within that, but like we sort of, I think we'll spend so much time trying to write like a perfect problem statement that's captured in 7 other problem statements that like it's not gonna really help us think broadly. I think some of what will help people, especially if we're going to go to broader groups, is having all of that additional context. Like, you really, one of the things that's not clear about tabs to most people is sort of like the overview and changes tab until you spend a ton of time in code review and like going back and forth between these and having conversations with people. And so like having that specific context helps people think more broadly about tabs. It's the same reason like when we talked to Secure about wanting a security tab, they were like, well, yeah, well, the other group, they already existed. And we were like, yeah, but we're not sure that was the right decision when it got done, however long ago it got done. And so like, we don't necessarily want to extend that pattern, but it's because they didn't have the context of sort of like what all those tabs were and what they were used for. And so maybe like thematically grouping is a better way to think about it than like sort of trying to craft the all-encompassing statement for a variety of things. And I think that feels like where maybe I was thinking about it. That sounds like what Annabelle was thinking about. That might help other people that have even less context than she and I both have.
Yeah, I think now that I'm hearing both of you, Kai and Annabelle, I think what you're saying is the same thing that I'm saying, but either I'm not explaining myself correctly, or we're approaching this from different directions. So what I understood that you were saying is that looking at the issue, that list of insights that we have there with problems neutral, and so on, that is more tangible. And to Annabelle's example of that lo-fi sketch of rearranging things, it was easier to, like a checklist. Okay, I'm going to look into this, look into that, and so on. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And then you were saying, Kai, okay, let's try to maybe just group them. And that's basically what I'm trying to do. And with these just 3 large problems. But in addition is keeping these, so these things that we have here as insights of the problems. So an example, let me see. So too much information in the overview tab, but it's difficult to get an overview of the MR. So in what ways can we better inform users about the MR without overwhelming them? And then we need, what are the insights that we need to actually answer this question? We need to know what's the information that users need to get an overview of the MR. So if we look at this list, we already have 2 things that are, at least 2 that are spread out here. So one is that developers tend to ignore the report widgets. And then we have a bunch of specific things here. And then we have another one, which is it's difficult to get a quick overview of who has already approved or still needs to approve the MR, right? And then we have this other one. There's an information overload on the overview page. So these are all the same thing that we're trying to address, but there are slightly, they're slightly more inclined to one way or the other. And there are just basically insights that we use as anchors to answer that big question. Like the big question, how can we better inform users about the MR without overwhelming them? So I think at the end, and this is my summary, it seems like we're talking about the same thing, which is, just group them into with headers that make sense and elicit ideation. Does that make more sense now? I think we're talking about the same thing.
Affinity clusters.
Exactly. So, okay, so back to Ben's original point, which could have saved us 27 minutes. Possible idea, affinity cluster. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes you need to go down the road to, see where you're going. Okay. Yeah, but just to clarify, and coming back to the original intention of that issue, prioritize problems. And I wrote there, hey, maybe at the top, prioritize and label problems as must solve or nice to solve. And I think that's because we had this big list of problems, but I don't think we need to prioritize them. We just need to solve all of them together. And I think grouping them is the good way for us to organize ourselves and just focus on them and talk about them. So clustering.
Yes. Thanks, Ben.
Exactly.
I just had an idea and I was going to write it down, but I'm just going to say it instead. Is it a terrible idea? This has nothing to do really with what we're talking about, but the last one, it's like how can we better inform users about the MR without overwhelming them and like getting that current state of the merge request. And I know we have attention requests that'll show everyone, this is what we're waiting for. Have we ever done like an idea where we personalize it in a way that like if you come to a merge request page, it says you need to review this, and no one else sees that, but you do.
Yeah.
Is that weird? I don't know.
No. I don't think there's an issue for it. But like many things, I thought about it, but didn't.
We have talked about it. Based on code owners is how we've largely always talked about that. Like if you were a code owner for a specific set of files that were in the merge request, we would tailor the merge request to be like on the review side, like files that you cared about because you were the code owner for, but not anything else of the merge request. Because that's really the only way we know why someone is in a merge request.
Or if they're like pinged with a conventional comment question, or if they're asking for approval, and then it could just be like, you need to act on this. That'd be so cool.
If we had a bunch of other structured metadata, the only structured metadata we have currently is code owners, but yeah, I agree. It's an idea that's like, I think not only for focus, but also for performance reasons, I think worth exploring.
Like you have 3 unanswered questions or comments on this page, or
Yeah.
have 3 to-dos on this MR or something. That'd be cool. I like it.
Yeah, and even I think things, not only the things that you need to do, but also, and that's something that me and Amy have talked about at length with when we were looking at the merge widget strings, is that sometimes we're showing or highlighting the why merge is blocked a lot to users that can't do anything about it, right? And like, hey, there are merge conflicts and things like that. So I think highlighting and emphasizing these are the things that